Make sure. So you can see that this is module 8 from a course, and this is a training course that I put together. I work with some folks here in Portland, a consulting company called CSG Pro, also collaborate with some other folks in the industry. And this 17 module training course has come together over the past couple of years. One of the very unique and challenging things about Power BI is that it is updated and it changes so often that it takes a lot of work to maintain training content. I'm actually on site at a client's office. I'm just squatting in a little conference room here with this nice view of the Northwest Natural Building behind me. But this is a company here in Portland that they're one of the leading providers of standardized and adaptive testing for school districts, a company called NWEA. And we're teaching a dashboard in a day today. So one of my associates is actually leading the dashboard in a day presentation on behalf of Microsoft. And that material just is changing all the time. But what I had talked to Hassan about presenting today, the topic that I've chosen is architecting building business solutions, and particularly using Power BI for enterprise reporting. So if you have some prior experience with Power BI, perhaps as a self-service desktop tool, we're going to kind of take that reference point and talk about how we would build solutions that we bring to the masses. And if you come from a more standard database background or application development background, just know that Power BI is a tool that you can use to integrate with applications and to use in a large corporate or large government organization to be able to deliver dashboards and reports and analytics to a large audience. So with that, let's talk about the category of Power BI for the enterprise. One of the things that differentiates an enterprise solution oftentimes from a more ad hoc self-service analytic solution is that oftentimes the data that we want to report on is on premises. It's in SQL Server, or it's in Oracle, it's in our data warehouse, or it's in an application database. Or perhaps we've built an enterprise data model using SQL Server analysis services, and that resides on premises in our data center. So you don't have to lift and move that to the cloud. You can. There's some great options to do that. But oftentimes we'll want to leave that data on premises. So I'm going to show you how we do that. We can create refreshable data connections, meaning that we deploy a data model alongside our reports up into the cloud using the Power BI service, and then we can schedule a refresh so that on every half hour perhaps, or every hour or once a day, we refresh that data. And that can be done against a lot of different data sources. Or we can maintain a live connection to an analysis services data model or to relational data. I'm going to talk about some of the pros and cons of using each of these methods. So as we think about external data sets, as opposed to just importing data into a Power BI model and reporting on that, categorically these are our options. One, we can use direct query, which allows you to publish a Power BI metadata model up to the cloud and then maintain a live connection down to the source data through an enterprise gateway. And I'll show you the gateway, and I'll show you how that works and how that live connection is maintained. We could also utilize a cloud-based database with a direct connection to that database. So if you were using Azure SQL database as your data source, rather than copying and caching that data in a Power BI model, we can also connect directly to it. SSAS on premises and then we also have Azure-based analysis services. So I'll ask real quickly, because I'm sitting in a room by myself looking at a PowerPoint slide, and I'm not seeing your smiling faces, just for a little bit of feedback. Do any of you have experience using SQL Server analysis services, either the older multidimensional or newer tabular?
Raising hands. Got a few.
Okay. All right. So that's a reference point, at least for some of you. So I'm going to move quickly through a few slides so I can get to demos. And by the way, I will encourage you to ask questions. So please, I guess just for logistics reasons, and since in any web presentation like this, there's always a little bit of a delay that we're usually not aware of until we try to interact. If you have questions, please raise your hand, and I'll just ask the moderator just to find the time to interrupt me, and don't wait till the end if you have questions. So please make this interactive.
Okay, Paul, can I ask a question? This is Hassan.
Sure.
If you actually go back one slide, I was actually looking at the new SQL Server 2017 reporting services,
Yes.
and it looks like it has a REST API. And looks like actually from the Power BI, you can use those API endpoints as data source. Have you ever tried that?
I have not tried that. I'm aware of the REST APIs for reporting services. From what I've seen, they're a bit lightweight. So anyway, without really having the story to tell around that, I think it's possible to use just about anything you can imagine as a data source, whether it's an API or a relational database or files. So yeah, I'm sure that's possible, but that might be a bit of an edge case as we talk about traditional BI.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. All right. So again, I'm just going to kind of walk through some slides very quickly. In a self-service BI or just traditional BI solution, we typically think of having a number of different data sources that BI practitioners or advanced users are going to bring together through an ETL process. We know that Power BI has this capability. And we're able to model that data into a semantic model that lives inside of a Power BI file. The reality is that PBIX file, the Power BI report file, actually houses an analysis services tabular model. And then from that, we build reports. You think about a full-scale solution, a typical enterprise BI solution. It might look a little more like this, where we have a number of application data sources, we stage them, we have an ETL process that dumps that data into staging tables in a staging database, and then we have an enterprise data warehouse or a data mart of some kind. We can either extract or use views to kind of break that data warehouse out into different views. So this is the traditional approach. I think in the last few years we've seen a lot of variations on this theme with the advent of big data, with data lakes. We see different approaches to data warehouses, Inman versus Kimball, even more recently, things like the data vault and hub and spoke approaches. But aside from all of those details, in the end, we need to have a semantic layer that we use for reporting. And I talk to new clients all the time who say, we're a Hadoop shop, or we're a Cloudera shop, how do we uniquely use a tool like Power BI or analysis services? And the answer is that though your data sources might be unique, The bottom line is that we're still going to build a data model so that we have the standardized representation of the data. And that data model might actually be a copy, a cached copy of the data, or it might use a technology like direct query so we can pass data through, but it's still a standardized data model. So this kind of creates this even playing field. So I present this slide because I think that in recent years, Power BI has been added to the list of BI tools that people think about as being something that we put in the hands of business users, and not a tool that we put in the hands of IT developers and database professionals, so that users can do their own BI. They can build their own dashboards and reports and work around IT. So there's good news and there's bad news when we think about doing that. So what is the purpose of a BI solution? So one goal might be for business intelligence to be a single version of the truth, a place to manage centrally managed data that is available to different organizations. This data that comes from a few different places. And in that regard, when we think about BI that way, it's all about governance, it's about security, it's about enforcing rules, and the traditional data warehouse is generally what we think about when we do that. Maybe coupled with the master data management solution, so the business has a way to not only govern and standardize their data, but we actually have data stewards who manage that data and update and refresh that data. Okay. Some might think of that as the old way of doing BI. For some, self-service BI projects might be freedom from unnecessary IT process. So, the business users have kind of learned to think of IT as being more of a roadblock, than an enabler of value. Self-service BI might be proof of concept projects that are kind of strategically migrated to a managed solution. Or it might just be, out of control side projects that work around proper governance controls. So BI has kind of evolved to the state where it is both of these things, which raises the question, how do we achieve balance? How do we provide the business value that the business needs, properly governed, properly managed, where IT is still in the center of that equation, and business users still have the freedom that they need to do it themselves? So Power BI can be part of that equation by using it as a client-only tool. Rather than encouraging users to do all of their own data modeling, we can learn from their experience and then migrate or build managed central models that IT does manage internally. So we kind of think about self-service BI, it might look a little bit like this. It's the top of the iceberg. It's an older slide, but the concepts are still very, very true. So you think about your experience with Power BI. You're importing some data, you're transforming it, you're modeling it, and then you're building these interactive reports. But Power BI can simply be the top of the iceberg. So down below the waterline, we can still have IT-managed, governed processes that might consist of a master data management solution, standard ETL, a dimensional data mart, server-hosted data model, and then that serves up the data for a Power BI solution. So I'm kind of at the risk of beating a dead horse here, so I'm going to move through some slides quickly. And so there are a few different ways that we can use Power BI in an enterprise mode. One is that we simply build simple Power BI models. When you do import the data, use Power Query to transform the data, publish that data up to the Power BI service where it lives in the cloud, and then we can schedule data refresh. And this is something that an administrator normally does. And if the data sources are available out in the cloud, then Power BI can simply connect to them. If the data sources are on-prem in our data center, then we set up the gateway, and then we can schedule refresh so that that data can be updated. But then we can also use analysis services so that Power BI interacts with it live. And then the other option is to use direct query. Now, the other presentation I was looking for that apparently I've moved and I didn't find in my system actually have out in a blog post, and I'm going to go dig that out here really quick. I hear a lot of kind of white noise, background noise that just came up recently. I can turn my volume down here, but I want to make sure that I can still hear you if you're asking questions. So bear with me just a second.
Yeah, that's understandable. Paul, actually that AG thing out there in your right corner, is there a way that you can take that off somewhere?
Since I'm operating with only one screen.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know that I can. I guess I can. Yeah. I'm sorry. I don't seem to have control of that.
It's okay.
Yeah. It's bugging me now. and I'm afraid if I close it, that it'll end our session. So I'll just park it in the right hand corner. So this is my blog, SQL Server BI blog. You can see that I've misspelled SQL Server. And I'm actually going to take you to a presentation deck that I had published on my blog some time ago. So here we go. I'm looking for the 9 realms of Power BI. Actually, I think it is a little bit older. There we go. So this is a presentation that I put together for some SQL Saturdays that I've done, and my concept here is that we all know the story of Thor, and Thor comes from Asgard, the world of the gods. And let me just change my zoom level here to blow this graphic up. We'll do it that way. But as I've been using Power BI in enterprise mode and working with a number of consulting clients, there are so many different ways to use Power BI that it's difficult to have kind of an elevator conversation with an executive or a business stakeholder and quickly enumerate through all of those options. And it occurred to me that there was a parallel here with the story of Thor. So if we look at Norse mythology, which predates Marvel Comics by actually several hundred years, there is this idea that in Norse mythology that there are 9 realms, essentially 9 different worlds. Bear with me as I navigate through these slides. And essentially, it says that there are really 9 different places categorically that exist in the universe. And I'm using this as a metaphor for the different ways that we can use Power BI. So within the story of Thor, Midgard is the place of the humans. That's kind of low on the ranking order, and Asgard is the best place. That's the place where the gods reside. And likewise, we can use Power BI in a very, very simple way, where we don't have to do a lot of planning and there isn't a lot of process, or we can build utopia. We can build that perfect solution, but it takes a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of planning to get there. All right. So some themes along the way. One, make sure you understand your capabilities. Don't take on more than you can handle. Keep your enemies close. What do I mean by that? In this regard, my enemies are unknown requirements. My enemies are essentially building everything that users ask for, and then giving users everything that they ask for. All right. So let me take you to a depiction of the 9 realms. So these are the 9 realms. I'm going to go ahead and click on this graphic and blow that up. And this essentially enumerates all of the different ways that Power BI can be used. I guess I can't click on that, but I'm going to use my zoom so you can see that. There we go. So 9 different categories that are roughly grouped like this. Cloud-based solutions can be a Power BI project where I import the data, it's what we call cached mode or a cached model, and then we deploy that to the Power BI service. I can use analysis services in direct connect mode where analysis services is on-prem, or I can connect using direct query where I connect directly to my data source, yet my model definition and my reports are in the cloud. So the first questions that I ask consulting clients is, can you use the cloud? Or are we working in an environment where we're cloud adverse? A lot of banks, financial institutes won't use the cloud. They won't allow reports to be put in the cloud, let alone put their data in the cloud. So if we're restricted to a completely on-premises solution, we can even in the cloud-based realm, we can keep our data on-prem, but we can put our reports and our model up in the cloud, but we can't actually deploy everything on-prem. So earlier you had mentioned Power BI Report Server. That is a capability added to SQL Server SQL Server reporting services now, where we have a special version of the SQL Server Report Server that can be installed on a local server, and Power BI reports can be deployed to that server. There are some limitations. Not all of the features are supported, but it's a good solution. We don't have to have internet connectivity to use that. Finally, in the lower left-hand corner, you can see that we can have an entirely cloud-based solution where we use Azure Analysis Services as the data source. The model and reports are in the cloud, and we don't even have anything installed on a server on-prem. Then we have two kind of specialized implementations of Power BI where we can use the Power BI embedding service, essentially taking Power BI assets by using an API and using an object model. It's completely programmable. You can take Power BI visuals, reports, and dashboards and programmatically integrate them into custom applications, typically web applications. And then finally, there's also a kind of a specialized implementation where we can programmatically connect to live streaming data and see that data live, as in be like a stock ticker where the data is actually changing. So this is kind of my summary of all the things that we can do with Power BI, which could warrant a much deeper discussion. But with that, what I would like to do is just give you a quick tour of the Power BI Gateway, the service, and then show you how I can use the gateway to connect to on-premises data. So as I'm setting up, I'll ask if there are any questions at this point.
One chip. Come on over here. Sorry, they don't have a microphone here.
That's all right.
Hi, Paul. You mentioned APIs, and I was just wondering if you could, if you were going to touch a little more on the formats of how to interface with those APIs.
I don't have that prepared in this discussion. I will mention that there are several APIs. I attended the Microsoft MVP Summit in March, and in one of the sessions with the product team, they actually put an acronym up on the whiteboard that was kind of funny, and let's see if I can do the acronym in my head. It was well, I'll tell you what it stands for because that's the way I'll have to work it. It stood for whatever you can do in the UI, you can do programmatically. And that's the product team's goal. And of course, the simple answer to your question is no, I'm not prepared to talk through the APIs. But what I will underscore is that any ability that you have to interact with the Power BI service, so not necessarily designing reports in desktop or generating data sets in desktop, but publishing reports, securing reports, changing data connections, adding users, adding security roles, all of those things that we do in the Power BI service through the portal. There are APIs for that, and there are also PowerShell libraries and scriptlets that will allow you to perform all of those actions. They're very modern. These are all REST APIs. The definitions are all based on JSON. And of course, there's an object model behind it that once you have bound to the REST API and got that schema that within your programming environment, you're simply going to see objects with collections and properties. So not the topic that I had prepared to talk about today, so I didn't have any specific material.
Answered your question. He says you answered his question, so good job.
Well, good. Accidentally, I assure you.
Those are the best kind.
All right. So I have two data sources that I'm going to connect to on-prem. Now, I have a number of sample Power BI desktop files where I've simply imported data, modeled it, and published it to the service. I'll actually just go up to my subscription here so you can see some sample files. You know, this is just standard Power BI fare where I've published a PBIX file, and that resulted in publishing a data set and a report. That report has pages, and then from that report, we'll go ahead and look at the report. If you're new to Power BI, just know that the user experience is very Excel-like in that I have a report, and skip that one since there's an error on it. I have a report that has multiple pages, and those pages are kind of like worksheets in Excel. Let's go let this cache and warm up a little bit. You'll see that it's a very visual experience. For my training class, let's see if I can just move that out of the way. I created this Power BI report page to track the departure and arrival performance of different flights. This is the FAA's on-time performance data for 2015 and 2016. I was actually sitting on a flight a couple of years ago, and it was there was a departure delay. So as I was sitting there working on training courseware, I thought, well, I'll go check out the performance history of the flight that I'm sitting on. So I built this page, and I was flying from Minneapolis to Portland, and I believe I was on flight 1073. So there's my flight right there. It was a Delta flight. And it turns out that the performance history of this flight was just absolutely appalling. And I mean, you see all the spikes there, which were average departure delay times. And the guy sitting next to me on the flight was from Nike, and he was in sales. I turned to him and I said, "Hey, I'm a data geek, and I actually have this airline performance data. And do you want to see what the performance history of our flight is?" And I showed him. He was unimpressed. But the funny thing is that our flight was not only delayed, but it was actually diverted to Boise, Idaho because of a medical emergency. We actually had a passenger on the plane have a heart attack and pass away on the flight. So, you know, unfortunately, statistics tend to kind of predict the future. But anyway, so that's one report, and I've actually pinned a number of these visuals to a dashboard, and to show you how to do that, I'll just go out and I'll say, well, that's an interesting visual. I'd like to put that on a dashboard where I can get to it. That's going to be an existing dashboard, so I'll pin that out, and I'll go to that dashboard, and you can see the visuals that I had pinned out on this dashboard before from other report pages, as well as the one that I just pinned. And for those of you who are new to Power BI, that's a very high-level tour of the user experience here within the Power BI service in the web browser. So I just have these tiles from various reports that I can pin because they're something that I want to look at on a daily basis. And then if this is an interesting visual to me, I can just click on that, and it'll take me back down to the report that it came from. So in addition to this standard Power BI report that actually has a copy of the data up here in the service, go back to my workspace. I also have some data sets that point to data that's down on premises. So this is a direct query data set, meaning that there's no data in that data set. This is simply a data model that has metadata that describes what that data looks like, but the actual data lives in SQL Server down here in this database right here. I use this Contoso DW database. And this data set was actually another Power BI report file I authored in desktop, and it connects directly to analysis services on premises, and that's in this database right here in my analysis services database. So let's do this. I'm going to pretend like I've just installed my gateway, and that's a very easy thing to do. I go to PowerBI.com, I go to Downloads, I choose the on-premises data gateway, I walk through a real simple installation wizard, and then I get this very simple user interface. This will pop up here in just a minute. There it is. And then this is the on-premises data gateway that I've previously configured. And you can see that all I really need to do is install the gateway on a machine on-premises that has connectivity to any data source that Power BI knows how to use. And the on-premises gateway actually uses the Azure Service Bus, and it communicates, it provides the ability to send data from on-premises up to the Power BI service using only outbound traffic. What that means is that my administrator doesn't have to open up any special rules or ports. Now the gateway itself does communicate on some ports that do need to be open, but they're standard ports that are typically going to be open on a server. But there's no risk of incoming traffic or any possibility of somebody hijacking the gateway to be able to get to my server because it's only outbound. So I do need to sign in to Power BI, so I just use an address that is part of my Power BI subscription. And so that authentication step goes and creates this connection and associates the gateway with my Power BI subscription. I have to remember that I've recently changed my password. Okay, so if I were installing this the first time, that would be the only step I would need to go through to establish that connection. Now I'd also be prompted to set up a recovery key and set up encryption if I want to do that. It's all very easy to do, but I've already done that. So you can see that I have some simple settings here. So my gateway is set up, and now I'm going to go up to my Power BI subscription, and within my workspace, I'm in a workspace called Power BI Workshop for my training class. I'm going to go and manage my gateway. And this just shows up because I ran that wizard. And I need to create connections for anything that I need to connect to down on premises. So you can see I've created a connection for SQL Server. It's pretty simple. I simply give it my server name, my database name, I give it some credentials, and then I do the same thing for analysis services. The only difference is that I've chosen analysis services as the data source type instead of SQL Server. All right, so that's done, which means that the gateway now has permission to connect to my data sources. The next thing I'm going to do is I will author a report in Power BI. So this is a report that I authored, and when I used get data, I'll actually do this. When I open up Power BI Desktop and create my report project for the first time, rather than going and importing data from different data sources like we would normally do, just need to wait for that splash screen to open up. I've got a few instances of Power BI running, and I think it's just slowing the machine down a little bit over screen sharing. Okay, so when I use get data, I'm going to choose demonstrate SQL Server first, and then I'll demonstrate analysis services. I'll choose SQL Server. And I'm going to make a point to use my my server name. Since I'm running on my laptop, it's just Paul's Surface Book and the database, Toso DW. And I'm making a point to select a direct query instead of importing that data. A key thing is here that the server name needs to be the same thing that I configured here. So if I use an IP address here, I need to use the IP address when I author the report. If I use localhost, which is probably not a good idea, then I need to use localhost. It just needs to match the server name. All right, so I've done that, and I do direct query. So at this point, I'll just select a few tables. I'm not going to walk through this entire process because it can be slow and cumbersome, but I do just want to select some tables that are related to each other. So sales to date and sales to customer are related. What's interesting here is I have the standard load and edit dialog, but the interesting thing is that if I click the load button, I'm actually not loading any data. When this load dialog comes up, what you should see very quickly is that it's going to evaluate, create a connection, and then it'll be done. Yeah, so it says creating connection, detecting schema, creating connection in model, and then that's the end of the process. Now, notice that the grid icon isn't displayed over here. That's because we haven't actually imported any data. There's no data to look at. But if I go to relationships, now, if I had selected tables that had relationships, then the model would have inherited those relationships. I actually selected views, and of course views don't have relationships, and so I actually need to model these relationships now. I'll do this in a cooking show demo since I already have a finished report, but you can see that I can define relationships. So if I go to product key and it will prompt me for information about the relationship, go ahead and accept that. Those relationships are defined in the model, but the quote-unquote model is just a metadata description. It's just describing these tables and describing the relationships. Now, like I said, I'm going to cooking show demo this, and so let me go back and just switch to a version of this report that I've already created. Make sure I didn't already have that open. No, I don't. Now, just in the interest of time, while this is loading, I'm going to take you back to the service where I've already published the report that I'm opening in desktop right now. Go to reports. You'll see it right here. I find that database professionals in particular, and by database professionals I mean DBAs, people who work with transactional databases primarily, not so much business intelligence practitioners, tend to see direct query as a very interesting option. Still waiting for that to open. Because we're not caching the data. We're not making a copy of the data. And so from the data warehouse admin's perspective, or from the DBA's perspective, they're thinking, we've already got all of our data in our data mart or our data warehouse. We work really hard to manage that and make sure that that's the single version of the truth. Wouldn't it make sense just to point our reports directly at that database? And I suppose that makes sense to a certain point, with the exception of this. As you know, in Power BI, these are some very, very simple visuals, but when I slice data, so by moving from fiscal year 2010 to 29, notice how long it's taking to update these visuals. That's because Power BI in the service is looking at that model, understanding the semantics of the model, and taking that one click action and translating it into a set of DAX queries. And then it takes the DAX queries, presents it to the SQL Server data provider, and translates the DAX into a set of T-SQL queries. The T-SQL queries are sent through the gateway down on premises, where they're processed against the actual SQL Server database. Results are cached and then sent all the way back up through the gateway. Now we're seeing kind of a worst case scenario here because we're running on my desktop. We're running on my laptop. I'm a little resource constrained because I've got a bunch of Power BI desktop files open and I'm screen sharing over Skype, and this shouldn't take nearly as long as it is right now. So this is kind of an exaggerated bad news story, but you can see that there's a lot of latency here. And that's the reality of direct query. Now I'm used to seeing, 3 to 5 seconds, not the 30 seconds that we've been waiting. We'll give that another few seconds, and if it doesn't react right away, then we'll move on. Any other questions while we're waiting?
Oh, I got a hand raised.
All right.
So is Power BI more designed for an IT function to build reporting, or turn it over to power users?
Yes. And I say that with enthusiasm because Power BI is definitely both a self-service tool where there is a very simple usability story, but it's also a very capable enterprise scale tool where when you unlock the more advanced features, they're not appropriate for users. And they really should be managed by, licensed practitioners. So it really does serve both of those needs. That's an excellent question. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, I've slapped the hands of quite a few Power BI users.
As you should, but they ask for these tools. That's why we give them to them.
Right.
All right. So a minute later, I did get my query results back. I'm a little gun shy about clicking on anything now, but let's click on this chart and see if we can get results for Beijing a little faster than we did earlier. So I would say a little less than a year ago, I started working on a project for a client in Seattle. They're a big electronics manufacturing company. And they have a very large Oracle data warehouse. And they built an analysis services tabular model on top of their Oracle data warehouse using direct query because they needed to implement row-level security. And then they asked me to build Power BI reports on top of the analysis services model. And I went in thinking, there is no way in hell this is going to work. And I was pleasantly surprised that the direct query experience wasn't that bad. Generally speaking, most of the simple interactions took 2 to 3 seconds to respond. And then we wrote some measures with like time variances year over year and year over year variance and seasonal growth, that kind of thing. Those measures didn't run very fast. You can just imagine the T-SQL that Power BI would have to generate to do year over year variance or year to date. It's heavier query logic, but it worked, and I was pleasantly surprised. Okay, so that was direct query. I usually try to talk customers out of going to direct query first, but it's there for a good reason, and it does work. So the next option, I'm going to close this down since I think it's affecting my performance a bit. Yeah, so there's that report in desktop. So let's look at using analysis services. Close this one down, and I won't save it. So I have already created an analysis services tabular model that literally took months to develop. It's a fairly complex model. There are a lot of KPIs, a lot of measures, a lot of DAX code, and that model is published to my local on-premises server. Again, you can see that it's right here. I've got roles established. I've got users in those roles, and I can point Power BI Desktop to that, and look over on the left side. We don't even see the diagram. We don't even see the relationships. If we go to Edit Queries, the only thing that you can change is the data source. And so when I used Get Data, I pointed to analysis services. I gave it a server name, browsed to a database. It let me pick the model, and that was it. That was my only experience in connecting. You can see that I can change it there. But now I have a financial chart of accounts. I have scenarios. I've got some KPIs. You can see that I can interact with this data very quickly. Of course, I am on-prem right now in desktop, but as I slice that data, it's going to be very, very quick. But since I've set up that data source through the gateway that matches this analysis services server name, I just publish. I've already published this, so I'm not going to take the time to overwrite it, but you'll see that, oh, wonderful. Let's try publishing again. The demo gods are not with me. I'm wondering if my internet connection is just latent because of the Skype call. So this all worked before we began our call. So I publish, it asks me, it shows me all of my workspaces. I pick the workspace and I publish. It's as simple as that. Now I go to the service. And go to my workspace, workshop, go to reports, and okay, I guess I had a problem with publishing that. But the interaction with analysis services over the gateway is very fast. You can measure the visual responses to slicers and interactive visuals in fractions of a second, typically milliseconds as opposed to several seconds using direct query. I also really don't have any restrictions at all in terms of functionality. There are many restrictions when you're using direct query simply because of the logistics of having to take every report interaction and having to translate the DAX query that it generates into a native query, either a T-SQL query or PL SQL query or whatever it is that the data source understands. There are just some inherent limitations in doing that. I think the product teams have done a fantastic job of enabling direct query, but you just have to understand that there's only so much that it can do. So let me jump back to the slide deck. I had prepared this slide actually when Power BI Report Server was not yet available. That's why I called it Preparing for On-Premises Power BI. But Power BI Report Server really just is SQL Server reporting services. It's just a special installation, but it's going to look just like a reporting services 2016 or 2017 installation where we have the newer modern tile look and feel, but you have folders with reports in them. It's just that some of those reports can be Power BI reports. We can also use Excel as a reporting tool, and you can publish an Excel workbook into Power BI Report Server. When the user clicks on that, it opens in their browser, so we don't have to worry about having the right version of Excel installed on their desktop. All right. So let me just kind of boil this down into options. Why would I not want to use on-premises data? If you're a Power BI Pro user, you are limited to a file size, a PBIX file size of 1 gigabyte per file. That's a pretty big file. I believe that within your tenant, you're limited to 10 gigabytes altogether. So, there's a lot that you can do with that. And if you aren't worried about data being live or near real time, we can schedule refresh intervals up to 8 times a day at 30-minute increments. If you are a premium capacity customer, which means that you're paying the $5,000 a month for premium capacity, you no longer have to license every single Power BI user. So only the authors of your reports need to have Power BI Pro, which is $10 a month per user. And then everybody else in the organization doesn't need the license. They just need to be part of your organization. And you can literally serve thousands of users that way. The scheduled refresh options are a little more attractive as well, because we can actually refresh up to 24 times a day in 30-minute blocks, and the file size limitations are actually much higher. So scheduled refresh using a cache data model is actually a very viable option, even in the enterprise. But assuming that we do need to keep our data on-prem, or we do need to keep our data in an enterprise data store, direct query is a simple way to get there, even though we have some limitations. I will typically promote using SQL Server Analysis Services as the recommended migration path from cached mode to keeping the data on-prem or moving to analysis services in Azure. And then finally, live streaming is kind of an outlier, but live streaming gives an application developer the ability to actually take streaming data and programmatically connect it to a Power BI dashboard where users actually just see the data change as often as 5 times a
Do we lose you? Uh-oh. What's up?
Schedule up to 30 minutes. This is for a pro subscription where I can do it up to 8 times a day. Any questions about any of the features that I've talked about up to this point?
Anyone? Don't see any hands.
All right. Okay. So query folding, I just wanted to mention one of the advantages of actually using cache mode. And this is actually part of the architecture that drives direct query, is that when I import data, we need to open up the Power BI model here. Use this one. When I import data into a Power BI model from a data source like SQL Server, gosh, I've forgotten that this was a model that I was on another machine, so my server name is wrong. Yeah. Darn it, I'm sorry. My demo fell apart because I opened the wrong file. Those individual steps, I'm going to need to turn down my volume because I can hear an echo. The individual query steps are actually translated into SQL, and this is through a process that's called query folding. Since I brought this up, I'm actually going to open up another project so I can show this. Don't have it prepared, so I guess I'm not. How many of you have users who prefer to use Excel as a reporting tool?
A lot of hands going up on that one.
All right. So I'm going to go to the Power BI service, and we're going to talk about using Excel. So a question that I get very often is, great, you've created this very visual report. Let me find something a little more interesting like this scatter plot. So great, you've created this very visual report. It's very interactive, and we can do all kinds of cool things with it. Let me take you to this one because it's even more interactive. Yeah, I'm just getting some latency here with my connection, so just bear with that as it responds. Okay, and if you've seen this, the bubble chart actually has the ability to show me data moving over time. And this will take just a couple of seconds, I think, to begin caching this data. But what you'll see is that there's a play axis down at the bottom where I actually have 2 years worth of data. And we can see the relative performance. We have flights on the x-axis, the number of flights. Each of these bubbles represents airlines. And then the average departure delay is on the y-axis going up. And so you can see that over time, we can actually watch that data change. And so let's say that I'm watching one of these bubbles and I'm seeing one of them that are moving around a lot. Maybe I see an interesting pattern. And I see that orange bubble right there, what does that represent? So that's actually JetBlue Airways. We're in just at the end of January for 2015. I'm going to click on that bubble. You can see where it's kind of danced around. Let's see if we can, the yellow bubble for Envoy Air. You can see that they had a really bad episode with departure delays. So, an analyst will look at this, or a business leader will look at this and say, wow, okay, this is cool. I understand what's going on. I can take action on this. I understand it. But the financial analyst is going to immediately say, how do I export this to Excel? And the answer is, you click this button. So I can export the data. I'm not going to do that. But this is a very large data set. But if I export this data, it will take all of the data in the query created for this visual, and it will export it to a CSV file, which then I can open in Excel. It's raw data. It's not going to be formatted, but an analyst could take that into Excel. But there's another way. So rather than exporting the data and bringing it down into Excel, I can also analyze this data in Excel, using Excel as a live, interactive report tool. So when I choose Analyze in Excel, it's actually going to generate an ODC file. It's a standard Excel data connector file. I'm going to click Open. There is an add-in that gets installed the first time that I do this, and I have to have permission to install that add-in. But it's using that add-in. The purpose of the add-in, by the way, is to maintain a secure connection. You see, even though I have a little error there, it's just asking me to enable this add-in. And that's because Power BI is actually using a web service and creating an OData feed to that add-in in Excel. But you can see that I have a pivot table in Excel where I'm able to analyze this data. So we'll just look at the percentage of canceled flights by flight date, by airline. I'll put airline on columns, and boom, I have data that I'm able to analyze in a tool that I know and I love and that I want to work with because I'm a financial analyst, and that means that everything in my world has to be in Excel. And this makes a lot of Excel users very, very happy to be able to do this. I worked on a project last year where I showed this off and everybody was, oh, clapping and, oh, this is awesome. And then I had a financial controller, a CPA in the room who says, we don't use pivot tables here. And I said, oh, great. Well, did you know you can do this? So I can go to OLAP Tools and I can convert my pivot table into cube functions. And now every single cell in that pivot table gets converted to individual functions, and it's actually going to take a while to translate all of those functions, but this gives the Excel user the ability now to split this and add their own columns and format it and style it and do their own summations and anything they want. So this is an absolutely awesome tool for enterprise users. And then if you want, you could actually take that workbook, publish it back in OneDrive, and then pin it to a dashboard where users can use Excel online as a reporting tool. All right. Well, with that, I'm gonna do a little bit of summary. So query folding is what we were talking about. Direct connect to analysis services. That's really my go-to. Typically, when we need to graduate from Power BI cached models into either an on-premises or enterprise scale data modeling technology. Direct query, again, that's when we have to connect to the on-premises data source rather than moving it into analysis services. There's a lot of great functionality here. Just know that there's always going to be a performance trade-off, and there are some functionality limitations that would be worth reading before you invest a lot of effort into going that route. So these are some of the limitations. You can only use a single database, single direction relationships. It's more of an advanced topic. It's not really true anymore that there are no time intelligence functions supported. It's just that performance will suffer. And you do have a 1 million row limit per result set. And I'll tell you that if you're working with that kind of data volume in a single report, you're going to have problems anyway. So that's really not a significant limitation. We talked about the on-premises data gateway. You can install it directly onto a server. There is a personal edition of the gateway that you can install on your laptop. Just keep in mind that that machine needs to be running all the time in order for Power BI to interact with it. In an enterprise solution, if you're architecting a true BI solution, I would spin up a VM specifically for the gateway with at least 8 gig of RAM, maybe more. 8 cores are recommended because it is processor intensive, much more than it's memory intensive. I did walk through the gateway, so I won't walk through those slides. And we do need to wrap up. That actually takes me to the end of this presentation. But I'm a big proponent of using SQL Server analysis services. I think part of my bias is that that's what I grew up with. But Power BI uses analysis services internally. And so if you do need to graduate from self-service BI to enterprise BI, and if part of that story is that we need to move the data model to a server-based model that we can manage and partition and have more control over, typically analysis services tabular is the path that has the greatest amount of parity with Power BI. Okay. Well, with that, I will thank you for your time and wrap up.